Welcome back to the CEC report. Nuremberg Code called for now. Now, as we were discussing in the last segment, we have genocide as a result of these financial bailout and bail-in policies occurring already, and I want to give a quick snapshot of what we've got across the world now.
That Nuremberg Code, just for clarity, that's the should have known,
knew or should have known.
Yeah.
When the Nazis were tried, many of them said, well, we were just following orders, we didn't know what it meant.
Right.
But the standard after that was, well, you knew or you should have known.
And this is where some of these Nazi doctors and so forth were jailed or executed, actually.
That's right.
So this is the context in which we're looking at this.
Exactly, yeah. That's what we're calling for.
Yeah.
So in Cyprus, there's an IMF report that came out this week, and it refers to the fact that the bailout policy, which is only just 2 months old, resulted in the wipeout of 70% of the deposits of Cypriots. And the IMF admitted in this report that this will have severe implications for any hope of economic recovery. You've just wiped out the population. Now, in Italy, you've had a new book released by Giulio Tremonti, who's the former economics minister. In that book, he said that what we're seeing in Europe will take shape under emergency conditions into an unwritten form of financial fascism, what he called white fascism, and he said explicitly using the methods that we saw under Hitler. In Greece, we had back a couple of months ago the UN Human Rights Report, which declared that austerity policies, policies of liberalisation, privatisation, are a violation of human rights. And of course, we've also seen that the austerity measures did not reduce the debt. In fact, it grew. In the United States, there's been a book recently released called Why Austerity Kills, which has shown absolutely shocking figures on the skyrocketing of the rates of suicides, depression, homelessness, unemployment, diseases that we'd been on top of previously that have just skyrocketed since the GFC. In Portugal, we've had a leader, the Socialist Party leader, Manuel Alegre, who described southern Europe as being like a concentration camp. It's people like prisoners lined up for the gas chambers. We're seeing the policies of environmentalism. 1 tank of biofuel, 50 litres, would feed an African child for a year. So we have policies in the context of a global food crisis that are killing people. Now, don't you think, therefore, that it is time that we invoke that Nuremberg standard?
Well, this if you come back to the austerity policies, like for what we're seeing in Greece specifically, where there's no more medical care, no more drugs to treat cancer patients. So young people are dying of cancer because there's no drugs, because there's no money for the hospitals to buy those drugs, and the entire system is collapsing. Now, this policy, this financial policy, is literally killing people. Right, and any policy, and we have it in our own country, right? One of the interesting things, which we were discussing before we came onto the show, was the idea that, that people over the age of 65 aren't going to qualify for this National Disability Insurance Scheme. So anyone over the age of 65.
Are they not worth it?
They're not worth it.
Why?
This is the same standard, and I think you'll find. Look, in our country, things are much more subtle. Drugs don't get listed on the pharmaceutical benefits scheme. Right, drugs that could save people's lives. Why? Is because it could extend their life 1 to 5 years if they're chemotherapy drugs. Well, what the discussion is, well, these are expensive drugs, right? And therefore, why should we? What's 1 to 5 years worth of a person who's got cancer?
Especially if they're over 65.
And I think the disgusting thing is, this is what Bill Gates has just talked about when he's just come down here in the last week. That these people like Bill Gates and others, the whole Obamacare package actually puts a monetary value on human life, saying that, and they actually calculate it, it's called a QALY, which is...
Quality Adjusted Life Index.
Yeah, and now there's another one called a DALY, which is a Disability Adjusted Life Year, right? So they put a monetary value in, they calculate it and say, well, you're not worth funding. You're too expensive, you're too sick, therefore you're now scheduled to die. Yeah,
and Bill Gates is this great philanthropist, and yet this is what he said in an interview with the Washington Post last week. He said the way this is talked about is, what's a year of life worth? They call it a Disability Adjusted Life Index, the DALY. When you're running a poor country's healthcare system, he said, you can't treat a year of life as being worth more than, say, $200 or $300, or else you'll bankrupt your health system. So with few exceptions, he said, you do nothing for diseases like cancer, for example.
Well, that's what we're seeing in Australia. It's like through the back door because of the drugs that are not put onto the pharmaceutical benefit scheme, or for other measures, pure lack of money, right, for hospital treatments, lack of beds, lack of infrastructure and so forth. And this is all a function of the global financial and monetary system. Because if you had a functioning country, you'd say that human life is absolutely precious. You don't place a value on it, and you make sure that people get the best possible health care that is possible. And you treat your nurses and your doctors and your hospital staff as the crucial, necessary infrastructure that we need to have a healthy, but also a sovereign country. Because if you're not a sovereign country, you treat your people like human cattle. And this crap that Bill Gates goes on with is treating people as if they're like human cattle. Like a farmer doing the sums on how much feed they're going to put into that cattle to keep that cattle alive, right?
Yeah, as long as Bill Gates doesn't talk about changing the economic system that created this, then he's a fraud. And we pointed that out. We intervened. We were out the front of the Q&A event on Tuesday night with a flyer, The Fraud of Bill Gates. Putting a dollar value on human life doesn't save people, it kills people. And what we have to destroy is this economic rationalist mentality. And in fact, when the Nazis were prosecuted, Dr. Leo Alexander, he prosecuted the Nazis, so he spent many hours looking through their testimonies, investigating all of this. He described the principle behind what led to the atrocities conducted by Hitler as rational utility, right? So rationalising what we've got because we don't have enough money does not cut it.
And yet the entire monetary supply is governed by central banks, like the Bank of England, like I read through that quote in the previous section. This is an entire top-down control of an empire-based system.